So, Taryn, I remember going to my first class probably about 8, 9 years ago. When was the class founded? What year was that?
I gave it the name, the class, in 2013, but I started teaching it in 2011.
Okay.
So that was 11 years ago when it was founded with a name, the class.
Yes, yes. Okay, so I think I went maybe in 2015, 2016 for the first time. My one of my really good friends took me. She's like, "We have to go to this experience." And I'm like, "Okay, let's go." And I can't even describe really what I went through during that first class and subsequently kept going back. We kept going to an instructor named Natalie, I believe was her name. And we were in LA. And I remember leaving that first class feeling kind of like physically, emotionally, everything just like raw and kind of wrecked. And I don't even know how to describe the experience myself. So I would love to hear from you. Just what is the class?
Well, you touched on a point of confusion that we've been experiencing since the day it launched. The class is an exercise workout where we exercise the body to stabilize and ground the mind to open the heart. So there's a methodology in the method. It's mat based, it's music driven. We use repetition and we use sound, which we don't often say out of the gate. We'll say sound, but not necessarily vocalization because you're not necessarily singing along, but you are. The idea behind that is that sound is simply moving energy from the inside of your body out. And when you can use the repetition and the music and the community and then add a little bit of sound, what it does is it unblocks energy that's inside of the body and allows you to, for me, and it's all been my experience, to think more creatively, to have more connection to your intuition, to what's going on inside your body when you can release some of the tension from the external world placed on us. So that's not probably a very helpful description, but what you explained is exactly what I've heard, not exactly, but for the most part, since the day that the class started was, oh, you have to go to this thing. Well, what is it? I really can't explain it. You just have to come. And then somebody leaves and says, I can't explain it. I can't explain what happened. And the reason behind that is because the teacher, when the method is taught in the way that it is taught to be delivered or shared, is that the teacher is engaging the student in their own experience of themselves. So it's very nuanced, right? You go to but workout sometimes and the teachers do this, do that. Yes, you can go more or whatever variation. There's so many different beautiful modalities out there, but the class is the method of it, the system of it is using the repetition, the sound, the silence, the introspection, repetition, sound, silence, introspection. So self inquiry, what came up? What did you notice? When else have you felt that? Let's move on to the next thing. Another round of repetition, another round of intensely creating discomfort in the body with choice. Pause, what came up? So there's a series of movements that we do that allow you to connect to yourself in a deeper way, which is why sometimes it's hard for people to articulate what happened because it's a felt sense. And I often say to people, you don't have to try to explain it. It can be your own personal practice because sometimes I think what happens is we try to put words around something that doesn't have words for it. And then when you share those words with somebody else, they'll inject a little bit of their thought process about what they think about the thing that you're thinking about. And now everything's just in this kind of enmeshed, like, what do I feel? Oh, yeah, no, you're right. I didn't feel that way. As opposed to it's an intimate practice with yourself that will be your workout, will be your breath work, that will be your connection to, I believe, Great Spirit. At least that's how I use it to hear the downloads that move through, and a variety of other things. But at the end of the day, it's a mat-based, music-driven workout that will kick your butt and open your heart.
Oh my God. Sign me up. I know when Keo was talking about it, I'm like, I am even more intrigued that you can't even explain what went on. I'm like, I am there. This is like, you're speaking my language. So I am just so inspired. And, we're just so happy that you're here. And before we go into more of the details of the class, I know you've kind of talked about this in many other interviews about the origin of the class, but I'm going to kind of recap a little bit. What I find so interesting about you is, you had this amazing career in fashion. You were dabbling there. You kind of took a quote unquote pause to learn yoga, and that kind of flourished into what eventually became the class. But that wasn't really your intention. So maybe you can kind of share, how did the idea and the intentionality of the class kind of come about in those early days?
Um, okay, thank you for asking. I will try to be clear. The class started as a way to really heal grief. And it's only in reflection that I realized that. I've always been somebody that has brought people together. I've always hosted potlucks from the first time I had my first baby into like kids just in my apartment all the time and people I didn't know and trying to get people together. And it was just part of my DNA. To go back to the kind of successful career in fashion, I actually started working in the Ralph Lauren store as seasonal help and then ended up working in one of their other stores and then went back to the first one I started at out in Long Island. And then I moved to the city with a job in their corporate office as an assistant. And then I worked my way up through the corporate ladder there. So I was there for about 7 years, and then I went to Dior. But oftentimes the story is told like I had this big career in corporate fashion, and it really was starting from the store level up and ended up having a really fulfilling career there. I really understood brand by being immersed in it. And again, this is in reflection. So when I started teaching the class, this woman named Mama Kia, who was an American woman that lived in Peru, I met her years prior. She was really the first pass at what unconditional love of a mother felt. Her name was Mama Kia, or at least that was the name she was given or called. And she really did embody that energy that I had not experienced before. And she left such a mark on me. And I had a relationship with her for the remainder of the time that she was alive. She had adopted 25 children down in Peru. There's a whole long story there. And when she passed, she left these children, now twice orphaned, behind. And I had just had my first daughter. And I talked to my midwife and I said, I'm feeling really blue and overwhelmed and all of these different emotions. And she had said, perhaps you have postpartum. And I was open to it and explored. And she said, we could put you on a low dose of medication and see. And I sat with it and I kind of explored in my own practice. And then I started to realize it was grief. And it was so kind of at the same time of having this life change with my daughter. And so I started teaching what is now the class in this room that was in my building that was like a storage closet that somebody named Len Ellis decided he was going to put mirrors in there and like build some rubber mats on the floor and built it into this room for me. And it started with myself and two other people. And every month, at the end of each month, I would say just donate to Mama Kia's children. And then that 3-person grew to 7 people, that grew to 12 people, that grew until we filled the room out too much that people would have to have my email to understand like, what is this thing? And it didn't have a name. And it just grew really organically. And there wasn't an intention behind it to be anything other than what it was. And for the first 2 years, we just sent the money, a little under 2 years, to Mama Kia's kids. And then after that period of time, it had grown in this way that I felt like it needed a different space. And maybe I give it a name and maybe I don't. And there was a lot of different encouragement by people saying, like, you have to do something with this. This is really special. And I was up against my own self-doubt and also a bit of guilt that if I did do something with it, did it take away from the heart of what I was doing? And I remember sitting and nursing my second daughter, and I was really emotional about it. And I had tried to connect to Mama Kia, and I said, I feel like I don't know what to do here, and I'm sorry. I was almost like apologizing because I was going to name it and charge for it, and we still her children's home is actually closing this March, and we still donate every month. The last child is leaving, so the structure that she created is closing, going away to college. But she came through so clear in her voice with this laugh and said, "Oh, honey, you have to understand what you're doing." And it was so powerful. I get goosebumps now just saying it, because it did so many things for me. It allowed me to understand this connection that I've always felt to unseen spaces, call it what you will, divine spaces. Everybody has a different terminology or not for that, or belief system. But it also put this piece in place that it wasn't just about, I have to teach this thing and then make sure that, her children have some sort of flow of funds coming to them, but that it was impacting people. And that is the piece that I was missing. It was very like almost, I'm doing this because of this. And I wasn't looking around and noticing that it was helping people through whatever passage they were going through, and creating community and creating a energy where you can be both filled with grace and raw and primal and vulnerable and honest and heartbroken and filled with love and celebration, and all of these complexities and these dichotomies and dualities that could all coexist in the body. And when people would come through the space, nobody was sharing what they were experiencing with their words, but people would make sound. So sometimes people were huffing, and you could probably assume that person was moving through something, or somebody is laughing and like celebrating and crying with joy, and somebody else is having a judgy experience of looking around the room and saying like, what is going on in here? So the beauty of those spaces and the power of what I think the method of the class has created is bring anything you have here, and the class will hold it. It's not do this, don't do that. And in tandem, it will be your workout for the day. Get your body in a place where you feel embodied and strong. And it just, so anyway, I couldn't talk about it forever, but I say that because there's so many pieces in the story that I think created the class. And another piece of it was Natalie, who this class that you mentioned that you went to. She, JC Gossett, who was my very first teacher, I'd met her at Mama Kia's maybe 10 years prior in Peru. I remember watching her throw her cat's ashes over the edge of a cliff, and I was like, who is that woman? Like, she was just so like, I don't know. I was just taken by her. And then she came to my class when I started teaching out of this kids' dance factory pretty early on, and came up to me after and was like, I mean, what you're doing is really special. And I said, do you want to teach? And so she started teaching. And then I had met Natalie, who was my second teacher. And then I asked her if she would help me with retreats and doing some of the, stuff that we needed help with, like signups and all of this. And she got right in there with me, and we just started building. So it really wasn't done alone. I do think that the power of a team, and a team that has values aligned with the mission of the work and what it's doing, is a super important component. So I feel incredibly grateful for everybody that's passed through the company. Otherwise, I would just be out there, doing this weird thing on my own, which of course has created a lot of feedback, which some is judgment and some is mocking and some is, you've changed my life, and it's all of it. So
gosh, it's hard to imagine people mocking something so beautiful, but I know that happens in life. There was one time I was in the class where the exercise at that point was, we are doing burpees for this entire song. That is like going to be the thing that we do in a song that was quite long. It wasn't like a 2-minute song. It was probably like a 6-minute song or something. And I remember starting to have this feeling as we were going through the exercise of like, I can't do this anymore. I can't get through this. My body is breaking down. Like, I have to go slower. I have to step back instead of jump back. And then I started to have all these judgments about myself. And then that started to spiral into, I'm not strong enough. I'm not good enough. All of these things that come out. And I remember the instructor at the perfect time kind of came in and said, I can't even remember what they said verbatim, but something along the lines of like, what are you saying to yourself right now? How is this a reflection of the way that you speak to yourself? And I remember crying in that moment over something that started off as like, we're going to do burpees for this song, but it turned into something completely different. And I think that moment I realized, oh, this is a form of somatic therapy. So can you talk about that? Can you talk about the importance of using our physical bodies to get through our emotions, which I think still to this day people don't understand or participate in as often as we would like them to?
Yes, I agree. So what you just shared is the piece of the class that I was talking about earlier, that we use the repetition and we're intentionally creating discomfort in the body. And one is given choice, right? There's a difference between this is uncomfortable and I'm going to choose to do one more and continue to breathe versus there's something sharp, there's something breaking, there's something off. So separating the difference of those two things, you're intentionally creating this. My heart is beating, my body is saying, whoa, right? And then the teacher will guide you in, what are you saying? As opposed to, yes, you can, right? So that's the nuance of it. Inviting the student to acknowledge their own mindset around what they're experiencing with choice. You can start, you can stop, you can do a different variation, you can pause and breathe. The other day I was in class, the whole room was moving at the same cadence, and we were probably minute 6 into a round of burpees, and somebody was in the second row standing there just breathing, just holding their own space. So it's beautiful watching that piece. To come back to the somatics, so I agree with you that there are some words that are overused and under-embodied, like embodiment. What is embodiment, right? It's being in your body, which is different than being in your mind. So the movements, the repetition, the breath allows one to be embodied. From there, the somatics of it, sometimes you go into a workout. I'm going to work out for an hour and the workout's going to be done and I know I'll feel better after, right? There's an end goal to it. As opposed to tracking the sensation in the body and feel it while you're feeling it, done through the guidance of the teacher. So feel the big toe pushing onto the floor. Feel the heel bone pushing onto the floor. Drop your organs in the base of the pelvis. Feel the sides of your rib cage expand, right? And you're guided into the sensations in the body as opposed to thinking about an end goal or thinking about variety of other things. So feeling into the feeling in the body then allows your body to feel you with it. And the chances of it releasing information to you are much more potent, powerful, higher chances of allowing for that space because you can feel and sense into your own choice. You are embodied, and the somatics of the tracking through the physical form, through those little points, and even funny points like drop the left shoulder, drop the right shoulder, sigh out the mouth, hum into the heart. All of these things are these little vibrational qualities in the tracking of the mind to bring you into the body so the body can then feel you with it, feel safe enough, and then perhaps, okay, what's under it? What's under the responsive I can't? What's under the I'm not good enough? What's under the when did you feel that before? Go back. When did you feel that before? Go back. When did you feel that before? So it gives the student more access to more of the history in the body. And then in that space, the revelations, the revealing of information from your body is just, I want to use the word properly. It's just easier to access, right? The information flows differently. So that is a key piece of the class and has always been really in the DNA of it. So while if a student is first experiencing that, like, what do you mean wiggle my, or stretch the webbing of my thumb and my middle finger? And then, yep, go ahead, think about it and then do it, right? And then roll the elbow joint around. So those things are not in the method of the class just to be funky. It's because there's an order in which we're following through. We do skaters left and right side. It's like EMDR. It's left, right side brain. And then silence, and then symmetrical squats, and then feeling into the lungs, tapping the heels, getting into the proprioceptive system in the joints, allowing yourself to turn the head, connect on a point, turn the head. So all these little points are fused throughout the method to allow the person deeper connection to where they are in time and space. And then those revelations are more palpable and more felt and experienced. So I believe that in my own experience, that unless you've actually experienced something for yourself, the mind will do what it's going to do around whatever words it hears or reads. But to feel it through your own body is where the change takes place for me. And then it allows you a sense of trust, and then it allows you to perhaps pay more attention to what's going on around you, see the signs through the divine. I could go into those spaces forever, but I hope that's helpful.
I have so many questions about this. And, you just kind of talking about the mind body connection. And I know for a lot of people, that's not as fluid. Like I'm inspired to be at the point like you, Taryn, when you were talking about nursing your second daughter and you got a voice from Mama Kia. Like, I would love to be in that zone one day. I feel like Kia's like there, like she's quite tapped in, I feel like too. But my question is like, with the class that you were just so eloquently saying, that connection is so important. And, all these movements have an intention around building that mind body connection. For someone who might not have that connection or might feel like I'm more in control. And I'm sure you've worked with so many people who've joined your class. Like, how long does it take for someone like that to break through? Is it one class, two class? I'm sure everyone's so different, but if someone's listening in and they're like, Taryn, I've tried to do this meditation class, or I've worked with therapists and I'm still in my mind, I might be one of those people. I'm still working through that. But what have you seen in terms of how long it could take to really break through that or build that connection through, for example, a class like yours?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's different for everyone. There needs to be a willingness, and there needs to be some bit of discipline and consistency around anything that's new. So you have the awareness that you may be somebody that is a little over-indexed in the thinking. If somebody read your chart, you probably have a stacked third house. That's where my mind first went. I was like, okay, well, what's your natal chart look like? But that's going into astrology. So I would say to be consistent with it enough and to allow yourself to be led. Because sometimes when our mind is really trying to control what is the outcome of this going to be, or I didn't have an epiphany in that class like I've heard, or there's some sort of structure where the thought is, okay, I'm going to do this and I'm willing to do it. Your brain says you're willing, but when you actually go in and do it, there's still a resistance there. What I always say is bring the resistance. And even in the burpee that we were talking about earlier, the I can't, great, bring it up, put it on the sound. So the more and more willing one is to say, I'm just going to be curious and explore this thing that I'm not willing to do, but be honest about it. If you're not willing, you're not willing. Maybe you go back in 5 years and you're like, this is a completely different experience, because we're all in our different spaces in our own evolutionary journey. And sometimes things are just seeds. Sometimes you can come to class once or twice and you're like, oh yeah, I enjoyed it. Didn't make sense to me. And then you come back later and it's a completely different ball of wax. But if one really does want to understand how to tap into that space, I would say, be consistent at least for, let's say, I want to say 30 days. I always think that is like a good time limit to like break a habit, and all of these great studies that have been done around time. 3 times a week. I think that the first time is generally, whoa, okay, now I understand. The second time is, okay, I understand enough that maybe I can let go a little bit more. And then the third time is usually, but then be consistent with it, because the mind is very strong. It is going to continue to try to share with you information about what to be scared of, what is right, what is wrong, whose side are you on, all of these different complex things. And one of the things that the class does is that it doesn't have a point of view of how to think or what to think. It allows one to become aware of their own mindset and then choose if there's a balancing that may need to take place. We know what it feels like when we see sides, right? There's an energy that is infused with, it's almost like a metallic. You're right, I'm wrong, I'm going to shame you and blame you until, and now what are we doing? We're saying that we're taking a side or holding firm on something, but it's mired in some sort of like hate or venom and resistance towards something else. So if there's a way that in class we can find the center of ourselves and understand how to connect to that center and then start from there. And that's why the classes always ends with the heart opening, which has often been mocked, because if somebody just looks at something and is watching something, it's different than what we were talking about with different types of somatic movement and exercise. It's different than experiencing it. So after you've broken the body down, use the breath, sweat, believed all of your belief systems, gotten quiet, given yourself a bit of love, what does it feel like when you open the arms and you breathe back and forth and you massage the center of the physical heart, and then close the eyes and listen? I often say, listen to the space between the space through the breath. And it may sound completely, what in the what? Good. Do it again. Try it again. Try it again. And that's one of the key things about meditation, or all these different ways that people put word logos, which is really just a series of symbols on an energy to define it, right? A word, a language. But what is it? For me, any sort of prayer is really the asking for information or the asking for something. But then to be able to put that free will aside and say, I'm going to put it out there. And then in your meditations is the receiving of information. So if you go to class, there's quiet spaces in a lot of class, super subtle, hands on body, you're just breathing. What is your tendency in that space? That's what I ask people sometimes. Is it to fidget, to look around, to adjust, to get my water? And if you just start noticing your own tendency around the drive for more, the drive for less, the move away from quiet, the overdoing quiet, the not speaking, the speaking too much, whatever it is, and then allow yourself to bring your breath into your heart and connect, that is when the mind may have moved down into the heart a bit, and you can hear a different download stream of information that moves through. And it's very nuanced, and it does require a bit of faith and understanding that there's so much more than we know. And the willingness is very important piece. And I think it's great when people are honest with themselves about their willingness. I often say, like, yeah, you know what? I hear that. I'm not there yet. I still want to be mad. I'm still holding resentment, whatever it is. But to be aware of it and to be honest about it, and then to bring it to your practice, put it on the sound, offer it up, turn it over, all of these things through the body, it eventually releases. And then you're left with, at least for me, the wisdom of the experience. And then if you can use an embodiment of the wisdoms, maturation of your wisdoms, that's evolution, growth, awareness, ability to hold the space differently. I hope that landed. I could talk about this method forever because there's so many pieces to it. You know, we could talk just about the physicality and what's going on with the mind. We can talk about the training. We can talk about the joint work. We can talk about the different systems of the body, regulation techniques. And we can also talk about what it allows you in terms of the connection to the unknown spaces, the unseen spaces. And I will often say in class that it's not just what you're doing in the class that will potentially bring up something of a new creative thought, a way to think outside the box. It's that you're setting the tuning fork of the body, the antenna of the body, into a certain frequency that allows you to potentially be open to things in the world, and then things start showing up. Right? We're human beings. We need third dimensional signs. Like, I need validation that this is not just some completely out there thing. And that's the paying attention, the being out of your phone, the finding time for meditation, the being quiet so you can hear. And that's how I approach even meditation with people that are newer to it. I know I need to meditate. It's so good for my brain. It's so good for, all these studies around different types of gray matter. But what else is it? It gives you space to listen to spaces that are not about somebody else's perception of what you should do. So I think that that's where you get the good stuff. And some days there's nothing to it. Some days you're frustrated, and then some days you're like, okay.
I feel so inspired to take the class again. I'm not in LA, but next time Yasmin will be going. Maybe it'll open in San Diego one day. And also we are down to talk about astrology if that does come up for you. So
I'm down. I have been in that world for like, I don't know. My mom was always a little bit outside the box. She practiced Buddhism growing up and chanted every day, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo, Nam Myoho Renge Kyo. And my dad was throwing her Gohonzon out the side of the deck. And I remember that moment of just being like, oh God, that's not good. And so I was always in these fields of people moving and praying and doing things differently. So for me, it's like, I could go off in that whole other portal of information there, but we do have a digital platform, and we
yeah,
created the platform because I went back and forth on, do you scale the method in terms of brick and mortar, which I really believe in the community aspect of people being together, but the teachers to teach the class is actually a lot more challenging than maybe the perception of it, because we've had tons of people come and say, oh, I want to teach the class, or, oh, I'm teaching the class in my own version of it, or whatever it is. But the difference in it is that the teacher is either performing or trying to entertain you, which is another method of working out, which is sometimes very valuable, and you want to get out of your own self. And the method, though, when it's used with the self-inquiry and all of the different types of somatics that are infused in the regulation, you actually don't want to insert too much of your own personality as a teacher into the method. Now, people like to know who they're moving with and all of that, but to be able to create a container for somebody and not be too much, like, of course, one should be themselves. That is a huge part of the training. It's not like don't be you, but it's don't make the experience about you. And if the students like you, it's bring the student into their own body. And we had found through the years that that was actually much more challenging to get somebody to understand how to do than not. So that is when I decided to do the digital product, which I hired a team for in 2019. We built the app. We dealt with all the music rights, which is still such a crazy thing. And then launched it 3 months before the pandemic. And then the pandemic happened, and it's just, we stream to 75 countries all over the world now. But the original intention of that was that the method is there, and people stream it into their home, but you gather your friends. So you live stream a 9 a.m. class, but you put 5 or 10 mats out, you warm the room, you connect to a loudspeaker, and now you have your own at-home studio with your friends. And it's quick, and it's, so I think what happened is because it expanded so much in the pandemic that people may relate it to like, oh, well, that was at-home fitness, which like pandemic world, like, there may be a relationship to that or not, I'm not sure. But that bring people over, connect to a speaker, and do it from home, because it will provide the same experience. I do think it's different in the studios, because there's a lot of energy in them that has been brought through the studio here in New York. We've almost had for 10 years. So there's a lot of process that's happened in there, and you can feel it. It's like a little
yeah.
womb.
I'm actually very, very excited about the digital platform, which I recently saw that you guys have, because I have a 5-month-old baby at home. I can't, like, being out of the house is not as possible for me right now. So I'm very excited to sign up for the digital platform. But you said something that actually reminded me. Every aspect of the class feels very intentional to me, and one of my favorite things is the music that you guys play, or the instructors. I don't know how all of that got chosen, but I would always walk away like, put it on my Spotify, all these things, because the music is so good. I don't even know, like, there's some tribal elements, there's some spiritual elements to it. I've like found all these amazing songs. So can you talk about the song choices behind the class?
Yeah, it's very music driven. I have always been somebody that's been into movement and music since I was little. I remember listening to Enya on a CD to fall asleep at night. I always had a Walkman. Like, it was it was the world of music, even before there was so much access to it, like the iPhones and the different types of ways that we can listen now. But um, the music is your co-teacher, and that is what teachers are taught in the training. So there's a few things that you do and don't do in the class. You try to, or at least the focus is to not speak over the musician. So you'll notice that there may be a lyrical song where somebody is saying something. And the other piece to that is, do you resonate with what that musician is saying? So you use it as a co-teacher and you're not interrupting them. So you're not in a room where there's music going and there's somebody else going and it's just like way too much stimulation. We'll use music that's loud and has this like kind of guttural, like to grind it out. And then you'll bring in like the most calm symphony to drop into the breath and then move into some sort of lyrical kind of co-teaching to take a little bit of the pressure off the teacher, allow the student to experience what those words are. So the music is a huge part of it. It's like just weaving a tapestry. And the music selection is super important. I think that it's very powerful when you have a lot of different energies, from what you were saying, tribal into lyrical, into instrumental, into quiet, into, at the end of my classes, I'll just put a sound vibration on, like love frequency, or maybe just a sound bowl. So into just that, in those layers of sound, I think are one of the most powerful parts of class when coupled with the sound from the human as well. So you'll inhale and then close the mouth. Notice what you feel. So you're using the internal, external sound with the sound through the ears, and then moving the body and sweating and breathing. And to me, that's the alchemy of the creation of the class. So the music is super important. And I think it's very important to hire teachers that understand that musical ear. And I don't necessarily think, I think people can be taught it. But I think that it's more instinctual to some people that gravitate toward music. But it's very important. So you noticed.
Yeah. I mean, I even playing some, in the mornings, if I'm not in the right headspace or I'm feeling like I need a little pep in the step before I get my movement in, I'll just put a good song on. Even the basic level of that, I'm like, the power of sound. We should have someone on the podcast to talk about like the inner workings of the brain and sound, because it's so transformative. So I can only imagine it's so intertwined with the class, like you said. I'm sure it's such a beautiful experience. So another question that I have, I'm so curious, I feel like we need to do a separate podcast just going into the business and how I'm just so inspired about how you've built the business and scaled it and the way you've kind of move in your own life. But, I look at you as someone just so intentional, right? You're a mother of 2 daughters. You have built this business for many years now, over 10 years. And I'm just curious, people might look at you and they're like, oh, she seems so at peace and calm, but I'm sure you still have stressors that hit your life, right? Like building a business isn't easy. Being a mom isn't easy. So I'm curious, you clearly have the class as a pillar in your life, but what are some things that you do? Maybe it's a ritual, or if you're feeling that unease, that you kind of move through that. Like, I'd love to maybe know a little bit of what's in your toolkit outside of the class.
Thank you for asking. A lot of it is the class movement, and it doesn't even need to be the class, but it's some sort of movement. And step one is the awareness that I am in it and that my brain is overwhelmed and I'm thinking about too many things. And for me, that shows up as self-loathing. I go into like different sensations in my body that feel somewhat dysmorphic. I just watch for the signs, and then I say, okay. Oftentimes, because I'm in New York City, which is a concrete, vibration of metallic, and I live downtown by the water, I'll just go down to the water. Last Saturday, I was just in a really not good headspace, and it was also raining and cold out. So I think sometimes those energies are asking us to go ahead and be quiet. But I just went down to the water and I just turned my palms up and I just said, show me. And I think that is just the most simple thing sometimes. It doesn't need to be a huge new ritual. It doesn't need to be a big, hour-long journey into something. It can be awareness that you are in some sort of state. Identify what that feels like for you, what those thought patterns are for you, and then get to know them when they come up, because it's likely a part of you that's asking for some attention. And then a walk. And when I say movement, I don't mean it necessarily needs to be intense physical exercise, but I'll go for a walk or I'll go down to the water. But I'll also just get into child's pose and turn my palms up and put my forehead down. And sometimes I'll roll my forehead a little to the left and right and just kind of make some sounds and rub on the top of my scalp and maybe even some little tapping, because these tiny little pieces, even in the middle of the day, it's like just give you enough. And then sometimes it's a conversation. Sometimes I need to say something to someone in my life that's not like, oh, I'm upset with you, but clear communication around, hey, you know what? I'm really in something right now and I'm exhausted and I'm overwhelmed and I'm not feeling like my energy is something that's positively impacting anyone. Can I have 24 hours of not, being with the girls? I'll say to my ex-husband sometimes, like, can you take the girls? Or like just figuring out if there's an action that needs to happen or if it's just a little simple tool. I do try to sit in meditation every morning. It doesn't always happen. If it doesn't, I try to find another window in the day. I think that this idea around meditation is like so simple, yet so many people don't do it. Your meditation can be 3 minutes where you close your eyes and you turn your palms up or your palms down and you just close your eyes and breathe and let it be what it is. It doesn't need to be, oh, my brain relaxed or but just tiny little tools. So, a child's pose, a walk, go see a horizon somewhere if you have the ability to. I find that is super regulating. And these little pieces, as you put them in, they start to become more part of your life as opposed to, oh, I have to go do this. You start to feel the void of it when you don't do it, as opposed to feeling like you need to insert effort. And I think also just using a bit of grace with yourself, like grace periods around things, around transitions, using a lot more kindness. I definitely am not the girl that has it all figured out at all. So optically, if it seems like I'm peace and calm and all of that, I find myself self-triggering 20 times a day where I feel like I said the wrong thing and I'm too much and this energy is, all of these different things. So when I find that those are the sentences that my brain is releasing and telling me, that is when I'm like, okay, here's the sign. Go take a walk or communicate. Or sometimes I even leave myself a voice note and I'll listen to it back. And that method of just saying it into a voice note and then listening to it back has a bit of a cathartic kind of release for me. Because I think sometimes you just want to be heard. Sometimes you can do it for yourself,
I actually love that practices like the class make it easier for me to get into a meditative state, because sometimes just sitting down and trying to close my eyes and say, okay, I'm going to meditate right now, especially with young children and so many things on my mind, feels so challenging. But when I physically exert myself, there's that feeling of like, okay, I want to get my heart rate down. I need to process just what happened. It just feels easier to get into that state. So I feel like if anybody's listening to this, and you struggle with meditations, trying something like the class could really help. I genuinely helped me. And I know we didn't want to go into the business and the brand that much, but I'm just so curious and I want to know more about this. Part of what is so alluring to me and my really good friend is the aesthetics of the class, like truly the visuals that you created, the kind of clothing that you wear and that your instructors wear and what's on your website. It's like the brand is very specific and beautiful. It's kind of classy, but also wild at the same time. How did you arrive to this very interesting concept?
Oh my goodness. Oh, this is a long story too. I will keep it simple.
Okay.
I was just sharing what I loved. And that's why I brought up Ralph Lauren earlier on, because I think in reflection, I realized that being immersed in a brand without realizing that that's what was happening may have imprinted what I expressed with the class more than I realized. And not that I was mimicking Ralph Lauren, but understanding the brand point of view. I think that the class plays with duality a lot. It is the original footprint of the class was these like very etheric kind of, we were always wearing light colored clothing, and it was almost off-putting to some people of like, what is that? This word cult following has always been thrown around, but I could see why, because there was a point of view in terms of the color palette. And then within that kind of yoga, like asana poses and whatnot that you would see, there was obviously a lot of sound and like fire and energy and sweat and just like blah. And those two sides, that tension, I've always loved to play with, that you can be embodied in your grace and in your wisdom and be vulnerable and sweaty and sobbing and also euphorically laughing at the same, not the same time necessarily. But so I actually stepped out of the business for about 2 years, and I just stepped back in. I mean, it's my company, but I had changed leadership, and there was a point of view that I was too far out there for people, and that it was something that needed to be adjusted. So the intention was to try to make it more kind of photo shoots and wardrobes and all of that were less polarizing, maybe, of like, what is that? And it didn't necessarily work, and I didn't feel like myself anymore. I felt like, where I don't understand necessarily where I fit in here, and I went into kind of my own internal warp around like, I am the problem. I need to, be. It was me that was doing it to myself. And then I just stepped back in at the beginning of last year, and I'm kind of coming back in with the visuals, and I do the photography, and allowing myself to play with what it is that I find to be interesting and unique, as opposed to following a trend or seeing what's working and then doing that. So for me, the instinct was always what inspired the visual footprint of the brand. And I decided that I was going to move away from my instinct and allow it to move into another direction intentionally to test it. And it didn't necessarily work, and I didn't feel like myself. So coming back into, like, right now, we've been doing a bunch of new shoots with the teachers, but playing around with, it's okay if we're using these weird drapes and these capes and these like very like, what is that? The problem with all of that is that people, in the beginning of the conversation, but what is it? Right? So the visual footprint and the difficulty in explaining the class have always butted up against one another. And I've come to a place now within myself that that's okay. There's other ways to explain what the class is, because yes, it's a movement modality. It will do so many things, but it's okay to color outside the lines and have a point of view of not necessarily what fits into a box of workout or fitness, because that's what's interesting, and I think sometimes it gives other people permission to do the same thing. What feels like you? Because when you're moving from something that resonates with you, and then you've noticed that it's resonating with other people, and it's not causing some sort of negative impact, because there are times when that is a piece of information you have to look at and adjust as needed. But it may inspire somebody else to say, I actually have always thought that I want to wear, yellow toeless shoes in a workout. And I've had this idea forever, and I'm going to do that, So it's like, it's okay to express yourself. And a lot of what the brand has been is the things that I have found to be interesting. I think it's amazing to have really beautiful photography with a raw, sweaty vulnerability in it, and put that in a fitness space. I don't see anything wrong with it, and I think that it may allow other people to be inspired to follow what it is that they feel is a creative expression of themselves. I don't think that answered your question, but what happened is there were so many iterations of the class, and the visual idea and the brand blueprint and all of that. So that's why I kind of went into so many stories. But
no, it's so good. And I appreciate you being so vulnerable about that, because I've interviewed a lot of business owners, and I can't tell you how common that theme is in terms of them stepping back as the CEO or the main operator, because they felt exactly what you felt. Maybe it's me being a problem or whatnot, and they step back. And I mean, I don't know the case with the class, but it wasn't doing as well. And so they've had to come back in and kind of operate how they used to. So I find it just so interesting that was like a similar theme in your life. And I'm sure it was so tough in that 2 years of you stepping back and even making that decision of like your baby that you've grown? You're like, this is not my intention, but now you're back. And this is a long-winded way of asking, like, looking back on your business journey, your life journey, what would you maybe have told your younger self? Like, one thing that you said was, I wasn't listening to my instinct, right? I thought I was a problem. Like, what would you tell your younger self as someone who's gone through so many ups and downs of life and business transformation, life transformation? And I'm sure there's a lot we can talk about, but maybe one thing or two things you would tell yourself.
Yeah, I've had some people ask me this question in the past, and I always find myself getting a little bit skipped up by it because I do a lot of parts work with the therapist, and she tries to bring in these younger parts of me. Right now, I'm with this 11-year-old that is very active in my inner world, and she asks me, "What would you like to say to her?" And I have a very hard time with it for some reason, and it's interesting because it's obviously a point of work for me that I'm continuing to explore. But I think it's not personal. None of it is personal. It really isn't. That most people are not actually thinking about you. Sometimes that's a double-edged sword, especially if you're a child or there's something that has to do with like feeling safe, but it's not. And if we can take the personal feeling out of most things and just respect that humans are humans and they're going to do what they need to do for themselves, and it's not really about you, and you're not a good or a bad person based on their response. But when you lay your head down at night, can you ask yourself, was I kind? Did I do that kindly? Did I infuse love into that? Include myself? That kind of combo. But I really do think that, it's not personal, and we're not mind readers. And unless you're communicating with somebody about what's going on in their own inner world and you believe that you know what it is, you think you're a mind reader. So focus on the relationships that you think are important ones and communicate well. And if you don't know how to communicate well, ask for help. I don't know how to connect with this. Ask a friend of yours that has been in the work. Ask somebody that or look into it. There's so many ways to communicate, so many. So those two things.
I love that. So beautiful, Taryn. Oh my gosh. I feel like we could talk to you for so many hours, just even hearing the bit about your journey and the class. You're just so inspiring. And we'll definitely share with our audience where to find the class. It's all, it's virtual now. You have a location, New York, LA. I will be a power user in LA. Now I'm like, why have I not been going more frequently? But I'm excited to take all my friends, or even your idea of what you said, doing it at home, having friends over, like that. I love that idea. I don't even know why.
I'm definitely going to do that for my next mom's group.
Right?
Well, and that's the thing. And there's two things that we talk about in the class when you're in the studio. Please don't talk to your neighbor, because they might be in the middle of like having some sort of experience and hearing like, or feeling something. And then you're like, oh my God, wasn't that great? And you're like, poof, you pulled out, So put that in your little toolbox. And these are different things that we're playing on with the app because we're redoing the entire thing right now. But what is the kind of onboarding process of that? Heat the room, set your mats out. When you drop in, don't talk to your neighbor, don't touch anybody, and finish. It's an arc, and it will bring you through the other side. And look on the schedule, and you can find the class at theclass.com, which is wild because I found theclass.com right when I started. I was like, I bought it from a guy in Florida. It was $7,000. I was like, do I buy this? I know. And I was like, had saved up and whatever it was, but I'm always like theclass.com. So happy I got that. So you can go in there and you can see the live stream schedule, and depending on if you have a teacher that you love or somebody that you want to experience, and then back into it and put it in your calendar and invite your friends over. It's such a great way to commune, and then talk about your babies after. Or honestly, like my kids have grown up with watching me take this thing on the road everywhere I go. Every vacation in the morning, I'm dropping in. I got the class out, and I'll do class, and then I'm ready for them. So the more and more that you allow your children to understand how to hold that space too, I'll communicate with them, and yours may be younger, but I'm going to take 45 minutes no talking to me. And then show them. If they come in, you stay dropped into your space. Obviously, if they're burning down the house or there's something going on that's needed, but you're a role model to them about what it looks like when you're taking care of yourself. So many nuances and all of that. But yeah, definitely invite your friends over and let me know how it goes.
Yes, I love that. And holding also the intention that one day we hosted a summit in 2018. We brought the class in for the summit, which was amazing. Somebody came from your organization and taught, and people loved it. And hopefully Yasmin and I will get to do that soon with a group of women and bring you guys back, because that would be so much fun for us.
I love it. Let's make that happen for sure.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Taryn, for joining us. We love this conversation. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you.